The story begins in Africa, where a protected elephant dies along with several members of the military who also die from the elephant's attack. On the other hand, there was another soldier who survived the incident where he was mobbed by journalists. Soldiers are accused of shooting a protected African elephant to death. However, the man named this pseudonym dodged and revealed that he and his troops did not commit murder, but were tasked with protecting wild flora and fauna in the savannah. But one of the journalists asked why to bring a military troop. Saman, who started to get angry, explained that this elephant was very different because of its unreasonable size, like a prehistoric animal, according to him. In fact, due to its ferocity, the elephant has claimed as many as 977 animals and 41 humans. Moreover, the portion of the elephant's food reaches 21 tons a day, which is estimated in 2 years the national park will turn into a desert. Even so, the ones who killed the elephants were not their troops, because they had not shot at all, he said. But when the incident occurred, a large man in black came and defeated the monster with his bare hands. He is Yujiro Hanma, but one of the journalists still doubts Saman's story. Now, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. The important thing is that he said the truth while leaving them. On the other hand, we are shown a small child whose body is shaking and haunted by fear because he was challenged by some of his friends to challenge the strongest man in a school. While walking, the little boy forced himself into the school. Inside, the little boy meets the school delinquent. While bracing himself, the little boy took out a knife from his pocket and challenged the strongest student here. Had laughed with satisfaction, but the delinquents revealed that they weren't the strongest here. But he was able to meet the figure and asked his younger brother to meet him in the park by the river this afternoon. Long story short, in the afternoon, the boy and his friends saw Baki's figure standing watching them from a distance. Baki frightened his friends and ran away, but this little man was still frozen, not expecting a high school boy to come to meet the challenge of an elementary school kid. Inwardly astonished, the boy then took out a knife as if preparing while being scared. After Baki introduced himself, he found out that his sister was Rumina Ayukawa. Baki, who came to accept the challenge, quickly opened his shirt and gave Rumina a light attack that sent her flying. But originally, Baki didn't take Rumina's challenge seriously, and now asked Rumina to just be his friend now. Shortly thereafter, Captain Stridham approached Baki and gave news of the fruit his father had just killed a giant African elephant. For those who are normal hearing this, those who know that his water abilities are very strong, and the captain asks Baki's readiness to fight his father, but Baki, who seems lazy to talk about it, asks Captain Stridham not to get too involved in his affairs. Because for him, this is just a matter of father and son, which will also happen in other families. The captain was annoyed while leaving because, according to him, this problem was not an ordinary problem, but the equivalent of a war between two countries. Long story short, it was already night, but they were still there, now showing how to practice shadowboxing. Baki said something that Rumina would understand where the concept was, which was like a boxer warming up his fist. Where they imagine your school is already the opponent is in front of them by creating an attack and defense imagination made by their own brain image. But this time, what the reflection saw was very different, how the shadow's stun attack was accelerating. Baki is really in a real fighting position with a real opponent so that the blocking movement seems to have to fight, creating a visual shape with the enemy's shadow. In Rumina's vision, which made her very dumbfounded, where Rumina's brain saw her opponent, Baki was a visual figure of the world heavyweight boxing champion named Iron Michael, a dangerous fighter in his class. Having bounced back from his own imagination, Baki got up and was about to end the athlete's fight. After it was finished, 3 naughty children came to ask what Baki was doing. Then Baki explained that he had just done shadow boxing practice, which made them very disbelieving, of course. Baki asked them to imagine in their hands a pickled plum and a very sour lemon wedge, then put it in their mouths and asked them to imagine how they would chew the fruit in their mouths. It's a mystery of the human body, even though their mouths don't have lemon, but just imagining it is enough to make them feel the effect. Now they were salivating as if they were chewing on the lemon wedges, and that was the basis of Baki's shadow boxing training. On the way to Baki's house, Rumina got distracted and wondered why these writings along the way were taunting and scorning her. Then Baki revealed that it was the work of his enemy that it was impossible to fight against him, so they fought with a letter. Then, when he got home, Baki showed me a basement. Where was that place where he trained? Then, remembering the news about his father being able to defeat an African elephant thanks to the dinosaurs, Baki wondered who he should fight to match his father's opponent, while facing the glass box containing the praying mantis that he had previously caught. Because according to Baki, the ability of these insects cannot be underestimated. The reason is that it can defeat wild animals, just like when a lion or tiger is impossible to attract its victims, whose sleep is many times that of their bodies. It's different when compared to insects that are able to attract their victims, even though their weight is 7, 8 times their body weight. They even bring them to their nests. It was also just like Rumina, who weighed 30 kilograms, which was impossible to drag or carry an athlete who actually weighed 200 kilograms. A deer can jump 10 meters in height, but it's nothing compared to the jumps of grasshoppers or bugs, which are much taller when measured by their respective body sizes. Plus, the movement of the praying mantis has been imitated and studied for a long time by ancient Chinese martial arts. Knowing that they are insects, people who are very reliable in terms of their hand slashes, bites, and instincts to attack them, those insects are very superior. All that stuff, and even if it's big and weighs 100 kilograms, it's easy to overpower an African elephant. But Rumina expressed the fact that unfortunately this was a very small attack. But it was easy for Baki to make it really big using the power of his imagination, or to imagine the bug getting really big. It's the same as his brain, which is able to create an image of the boxer Iron Michael, who, even though he had died, returned to the world to be his opponent. Baki was going crazy, where he had already imagined the mighty insect of a giant praying mantis, if Thanksgiving with it, which he imagined in his own brain while looking up as if how tall his opponent was. Rumina was frozen in silence by Baki's movement of invading the air constantly, but it seemed so real. Baki, as if he was fighting an enemy, made Rumina slowly flashed in her vision how to be fighting those bugs. Moving on to a story from the past in China. A priest named Among, who accidentally saw a fight between a sparrow and a praying mantis in the middle of a forest. He must be surprised to see that the winner is a praying mantis that can slam a sparrow. Knowing the extraordinary abilities of these insects, Among studied the moves until when he succeeded in perfecting them, he named the Torican technique. Then Baki prepares with the Torican technique, a position similar to the mimicry of a praying mantis preparing to fight back. However, Baki was overwhelmed by spontaneous resistance. His body easily read the next attack from the praying mantis. Baki now knows how to fight it, but it seemed that the movement Rumina saw now was different, in that it was the exact same movement as that of an egret. Moving on to a hotel that has a very high waterfall behind it, where Captain Stridham is now looking to meet someone there. Then the waiter took him to a pool with a strong current that was almost equivalent to 20 kilometers per hour, which was impossible for humans to swim. But in fact, the person he was looking for was diving and had been swimming for over an hour in the pool. It turns out that the person the captain is looking for is Yujiro Hanma. Long story short, the arrival of Captain Stridham is about to provide new news. Baki, who will now become his rival, has just defeated a 100 kilograms praying mantis insect. A technique created for himself, the captain said in amazement, while asking Yujiro's opinion about his son, obviously making Yujiro guffaw at that, because according to him, no matter how big and terrible his opponent is, it's still a fantasy. It's not even comparable to a real puppy. The scene moves to America. A journalist broadcasts live the coming of the American president's visit to the Dallas area with very tight security. But suddenly all the networks stopped for a moment, and everyone was shocked that the American president at that time disappeared suddenly, almost invisible in public. making everyone panic about the situation until finally the guards got the news that their president was taken to a restaurant. Turns out it was Baki's doing, but the president named George Bush is still healthy and unharmed. Baki also realized that what he was doing was indeed a very serious crime of kidnapping and holding an American president hostage. Then what do you want to cool from him? In fact, Baki wants him to be jailed in the state of Arizona, where Unbound caster aka Biscuit Oliva lives. After being threatened with death, the president complied. Baki then asked to inform his besiegers to disperse and demanded a $10 ransom to pay for the coffee. Now Baki has been officially arrested and is being held in court and has been found guilty. Baki was going to the place he had planned before the Arizona prison. When he got there, Baki had to go through very tight security with several other new prisoners. Then in the tray, it must pass a body check and data copying from its body. Then Baki had to pass through a thick acrylic door every 10 meters, and it was seen that prisoners with large cases were being held there. Baki arrives at a posh passage which suggests that Oliva's place is near. The warden didn't dare to accompany him and told Baki to casually enter his room. Arriving at Baki, he was greeted by Oliva, who already knew that Baki would be imprisoned while entertaining him in a chair. Oliva knows Baki will be fighting his father in the near future. That's why to enter this prison want to use himself as his training. Then Oliva reminded him that he was number 1 here. In addition, there are 4,071 serious criminals who are also after his life, while Baki is only a boxer who has just taken the professional class, as if he is not worthy to fight him. However, Baki emphasized that his visit was not about boxing, but was about fighting himself while attacking Oliva. But Oliva didn't budge and casually told Baki that he had an agenda to fight number 2 or the second strongest in this prison next week. Now Baki has to queue up and ask him to share a room with the number 2 man. Long story short, the prison warden escorted him and no one was seen in the room, but suddenly someone woke up. He was surprised because the world boxer was still alive, Iron Michael. Baki assumes that Michael is the number 2 that Oliva is referring to. While worried, Michael asked Baki to keep his word because he was nothing in this place. He wasn't even in the top 10 strongest in this prison. Then a little old man appeared and asked them to be quiet, worried that their speaker would disturb the young master or number 2. Meanwhile, Baki saw a large and long hand coming out of a blanket. Even bed is not enough on his body. Then Grandpa asked Baki to sleep, because tonight might be Baki's last good night's sleep. Long story short, morning came in a hurry. Baki wanted to see number 2, who turned out to be almost 2.5 meters tall, twice his height. Baki had to be surprised at the fact that he wasn't number 2. The number 2 appears while welcoming Baki, who already knows that Baki should kidnap the American president, and it would be perfect if Baki kills him at that time, says the number 2, as if he hates the American president. Baki asks if by beating you he can become number 2 here, which makes the others surprised at Baki's words. Not long after, a prison warden came and asked everyone to gather in front of their room to be absent one by one. While a prison warden was checking, casually the number 2 came without joining the others in line and even asked the warden for cigarettes, which seemed to happen frequently in this prison. Seeing this sight was strange to Baki. Dinner time arrived, all the prisoners ate in an orderly manner. But the big man who is opposite number 2 wants to oppose him because it is known that he is a former delinquent who was imprisoned for rioting on the streets, killing many people. Then the man asked, "If you are number 2, the rules you call me number 1, said the big man while skewering the meat on his plate. But the number 2 casually responded to the big man and showed how he made the spoon in his hand become irregularly bent. A warden pointed a gun at the big man, but was suddenly taken away by number 2. Number 2 then asked the big man to voluntarily shoot him in the head. But before that happened, the number 2 asked the warden to provide a special arena to continue the fight with him while being guarded by several wardens. The number 2 invites to fight with the style according to the ability of the big man. Feeling humiliated, he prepares, but he is unable to lift his opponent's body. The number 2 then hit the big man's ear and inserted his hair to damage the eardrum. While number 2 was leaving, came the warden, who was also very cruel and quickly killed the rioting prisoners after lunchtime was over. The number 2 came, he greeted Baki, then in the middle of their conversation, the warden hit Baki. Because he was imprisoned, it was forbidden to speak, but Baki, who didn't budge, showed how easily he could bend the staff. Because of what he did, Baki is now locked in a special cell, which is very dark and narrow, and his thumbs are handcuffed behind his back. Obviously, it was very difficult, but even so, who would have thought that the old man always helped Baki? Now he feeds Baki with a toast and a cup of coffee. Then the grandfather reveals the true identity of number 2, which in fact turns out to be a president in a remote country that is rarely known to people, an island at the tip of South America that is only inhabited by no more than 20,000 people, where since childhood, the original man named John Guevara has been taught martial arts by his grandfather. He began to teach his subordinates as well, since when he was a teenager, his life was always filled with criminal acts as pirates who plundered foreign ships. Until he reached the age of 17 years, John Guevara has a view that is not wearing. When the people on the island have to work like slaves from foreign tourists who stop by their island. In fact, due to the influence of foreign capitalists, the natives fell into a slump. This made John Guevara act to liberate his island, and then he began to lead his men to move for independence. However, John Guevara's independence movement was kissed by the then-American president, George Bush, who really hated the movement led by John Guevara. Then one of the ministers suggested attacking with full military force to the island with the allegation that the people there would stage a coup against the American government in order to deceive the media. But suddenly, one of John Guevara's trained followers was able to enter the meeting room unnoticed by the guard post. While the position of the hand that almost broke the president's neck, the man showed on a screen where John Guevara sent a video to himself at the residence of President Bush. But John Guevara immediately went inside and met his 2 sons, who looked cheerful, not knowing that they were in danger, and his wife, who was smiling. The president was spontaneously shocked and didn't want to take the risk. The president approved the island's independence, now led by John Guevara. Then Baki asked why a man as strong as John Guevara could be in jail. Then, while thinking about who is the most powerful here, said the grandfather, and this already implied to Baki that it was Oliva who was able to trick John Guevara into this prison. That's why John Guevara was forced to go to prison. Oliva worthy of thorns to John Guevara. Now that John Guevara himself is in prison, he still intends to beat Oliva. The Americans, who were starting to worry about the 3 strongest figures posing a threat, were watching the 3 dangerous humans from satellites. The first is Yujiro Hanma, Baki's own father. The second is the lawless Biscuit Oliva, and the last is the number 2 Guevara. All 3 of them were carried by special satellite surveillance. It is also known that artificial satellites are commonly used by the military. Instead of being used for other purposes, it is now focused on following in the footsteps of the 3 wherever they go. But soon one of the wardens who found them talking was very clearly chatting. A man was imprisoned, Grandpa that he only gave him food, but unfortunately Grandpa had to hurt his finger. Then Baki, kicking the warden's hat, asked him to be a little polite to the helpless old geezer. While threatening his bald head to make sure he doesn't grow any more hair, the warden, who has been doing this job for a long time, is quite happy that finally a prisoner resisted. Plus, Baki has taunted his head physique fast, swinging his bat. Baki apologized for his behavior, which had embarrassed her, but once again the handcuffs on her thumbs like this were no hindrance to her. Because it's easy for him to flex the arts that make the warden have to be hit again. But Baki, who still wears his heart with his opponent, or can't bear to see the warden fall from above and still holds him with small handcuffs on his thumbs until he bleeds. Guevara, who saw the incident, regretted that Baki did not let the warden die and left quickly because Guevara was known to hate Americans. Long story short, Baki was free from the dark cell after 3 days of being locked up there. And now Baki is told to work on the road foundation construction. However, To the astonishment of one of the wardens who was watching Baki, with 2 hits he was able to sink iron into the foundation, making his friends behind him fall far behind. Meanwhile, Michael the boxer right behind him was only able to use 3 punches. During recess, Baki took Michael, who received news that next month Michael would be released from prison. Michael confirmed this because there was a heavyweight boxing championship tournament he had to take part in. Baki understands why Michael doesn't want to have anything to do with the most powerful title in prison. But Michael revealed he wasn't interested in the title. But his team was waiting in Brooklyn for a boxing tournament event. Switch to the warden of the zone, who gives a very large amount of money to one of the wardens. It is known that the money came from a man named Bob Murphy, chairman of the International Boxing Association. A bribe to make my now incarcerated former heavyweight boxer fail to compete in a boxing tournament next month. The warden here is surprised to know what Iron Michael means. It was impossible for him to do this task, plus Michael was a heavyweight boxer, and impossible for the strongest people like Oliva and Guevara to help them, because they themselves didn't care about orders. But here the warden reveals that he has a perfect match that beats Michael. That is a team group called the Mouth, and it turns out they are triplets, each of them called Lips, Teeth, and Tongue. Because of their compactness and perfect combination, it's like a mouth consisting of tongue, lips, and teeth. Where, when faced with fish meat food, for example, the lips will wrap the food so that it doesn't come out, then the tongue will taste it and lead the food to the side. Now it's the job of the molars to pulverize the food until the food is soft, as well as there is a danger like a thorn, then the tongue of a piece feels it, and it is a form of combination of the perfect team. Now the warden's job is to bring them together with Michael Iron. Long story short, Michael, who was summoned, was confused and realized that he was being challenged by these 3 twins. Even though he looks good at martial arts, he still looks like an amateur, said Michael. But they deny that they have experience in karate, boxing, and judo, he said while. Starting to take their position, they will start attacking with a trick. Michael, who had received successive attacks from the 3 of them, made him very overwhelmed, and he started to focus on just one person and started chasing him, and while the other was off guard, attacked Michael from behind. Simultaneous attacks that are very fast still make Michael have to fall because it is impossible for him to avoid 3 simultaneous attacks. Feeling still dissatisfied, one of them started to lock his neck and quickly abused him, while Michael, who had completely lost consciousness. Now Michael's last task is to plan to sever Michael's arm tendons so that his hands can't punch again. Suddenly, an iron bolt with a small pinwheel behind it almost hit them, so they had to be focused by the sudden figure of Guevara, rolling past them while stopping at the exact Kishir throw. Guevara, who got up annoyed with the wheel that didn't turn while looking at the moon, which was rarely seen in such circumstances, reminded him of his youth when he was a pirate. And it turns out that here Guevara already knows their reputation as a team of criminals with very close cooperation called a team of mouths. Even so, assuming Guevara is enough to destroy one of them, surely their fighting ability and cohesiveness will weaken to 1/10 of usual. Feeling belittled, they were forced to surround Guevara in the same position that was done to Michael earlier. Guevara started pissing in front of them, blocking his fist while swinging his cock up and down 180 degrees. What this obscure man only did made them choose to avoid and be very annoyed, while lying down allow them to molest him. However, they had to be surprised by the serious injuries on his face and body. Guevara could still stand while welcoming the wind that turned the mill. Together with the arrival of the wind blowing like a sea storm, Guevara was excited while polishing his face with the war ink he had prepared. They paused for a moment, then began to adjust their positions with one of them surrounding him at the top of an encirclement from all directions. However, Guevara casually asked those above to come down. When they were caught off guard, they attacked from behind. One of them had to fall due to Guevara's brutal attack. Obviously, getting injured by one of them makes them even more insecure and weak, and even pees in their pants. It was clear that the incident that was happening before his eyes deeply shocked the deputy chief warden. Meanwhile, Guevara called him asking him to take care of this mess along with the arrival of Michael, who was amazed by Guevara's attack just now. If Guevara had not come, he would have disappeared, he said. But Guevara didn't mind that because they were roommates. It was only natural that they had to help each other. Long story short, Guevara and Michael returned to his room, but they were greeted by Baki, who begged to fight him. Clearly, Guevara is ready at any time, even if he has to be at this moment. But not long after, Oliva came from the direction of the door, calling Guevara to force his way in by destroying the iron door. Guevara, who looked calm and unhinged when he met him, reflected extraordinary abilities. Plus Guevara, the founder of a small nation on the southern tip of America. But unfortunately, Guevara still has the same flaws as Oliva said. That is, how childish are their teenagers until they grow to adulthood, who always want to win in something. Even though their ambition is to always win, their scheduled fights will continue. Then Guevara asked what Oliva's advantage was in his fight. Oliva confidently answered, he was fighting for others. Obviously, according to Guevara, fighting for other people is a weakness. Hearing this spontaneously made Oliva angry, but it turned out that the person who motivated Oliva to fight was his beautiful girlfriend, and this obviously made Guevara a little surprised if Oliva had a girlfriend. Guevara understood that Oliva wanted to show his girl what he was capable of, but their conversation had to be interrupted by Baki, who was very amused by their chat, which had nothing to do with the upcoming battle. Baki is made unconscious for a while because he is considered to be disturbing, followed by Oliva, who is still in love when he thinks about or raises his compliments. Soraya takes out a handkerchief. But Oliva buying handkerchiefs in the city of girls he adored clearly took Guevara by surprise. What kind of thing are you guys dating, or is it just Oliva who is a friend but considers a boyfriend without any declaration or approval from his idol? Then Oliva explained that with any object that is in the area where his girlfriend lives, Oliva can already imagine his presence. Like someone who buys goods related to the brand of his idol, of course he can feel the presence of his idol. Meanwhile, Oliva, who had taken a bath, dressed up neatly, complete with perfume, was preparing to enter his lover's room. He carried a bunch of red roses and was wondering what words to say. A word about himself who really loves her while the feelings of his heart are now difficult to describe. How he always thought of growing old with her, and the thoughts that kept coming over and over again weighed heavily on his mind. Guevara assumed that maybe the lover Oliva meant was an imaginary lover, or maybe this was a story made up to strengthen his identity as a prisoner who was not bound by law. Grandpa prefers silence than 4,000 prisoners become victims of his members. Even so, his impending fight against him, Guevara ensured that Oliva would be a regular prisoner, returning as a lowly prisoner with neither power nor adoration, while giving a mysterious jar to his tall friend named Ken. Guevara asked Ken to give him the jar when the tournament with Oliva arrived, then ordered not to open it because wind waves of lightning can come out of the jar. Grandfather was curious. He then asked what was in it. Then Guevara explained that it contained something special. It was courage, then. The scene moves on to a boy who is standing against the storm while opening the lid of the jar towards the sea. Grandfather had doubts that Guevara would justify it, but the day before he left for America, there was a terrible storm on his island, and then a mute boy came who gave him the jar that was taken from the top of the cliff. On the other hand, it turns out that Oliva's lover is a real human being, but his attitude is too indifferent. Even here, he seems to hate Oliva. While throwing things at him, even though Oliva, who was scary and looked terrible, was still patient and kept smiling. Oliva patiently approached her, with a little seduction made a girl named Maria blush and started calling Oliva darling. The fight between the two strongest humans in the prison is about to begin, between Oliva and Guevara. Meanwhile, the detainees were all released and allowed to talk that day. They wondered, will Oliva bring his girlfriend to this battle arena? On the other hand, the chief looter doesn't want to miss this battle. Even if a prisoner escapes, he doesn't care either. Meanwhile, Guevara had arrived, who had been getting ready while asking for the jar he had prepared earlier. At a different angle, All the prisoners gaped when Oliva came out of the hallway while carrying a wide bed. Sure enough, it turned out to be a bed containing Maria, who turned out to be an obese girl, very contrary to the expectations of the prisoners' wishful thinking. Maria, who was starting to get annoyed with the excessive gazes of the audience at her. Oliva tried to calm him down, that they were all amazed by your beauty, Maria, and then quickly turned to face Devaru getting ready to fight. Olive said goodbye to Maria to show off his skills. Then Guevara praised Maria very much and asked Oliva not to lose while showing him the jar that was his passion. Guevara opened it even though it was just his imagination, but it was enough for Guevara to be his encouragement to fight. Then Guevara took off his bandana or headband and asked Oliva to hold the end of the bandana. Oliva understands that the beginning of this match began with a lose-lose game, namely a battle of European royalty in the 15th century. While holding both ends of the handkerchief and the other hand give in to each other, and those who are released will be considered losers and will lose their honor. No wonder he heard that lately Guevara was practicing on his fingers and standing upside down with 5 fingers supporting. Then proceed with only the thumb. Apparently it was in preparation for this fight, said Oliva. Guevara said he admired Oliva's finger because he heard extraordinary news from Oliva. Where so Oliva, who is able to fold coins, break beer cans, and bend large steel, has been heard all over his island. Oliva, who didn't want to elongate this conversation, started holding the end of the bandana that had the ovary asking him to start quickly. Oliva, who was constantly being beaten, was silent without attacking. Likewise with Guevara, who finally realized that it was impossible for his attack to knock him down. However, according to him, he only needed to make Oliva forget with his finger which was currently holding the end of the bandana. Oliva was knocked down, but he was still strong enough to pinch the edge of the cloth with such a heavy weight, causing an uproar that he had to hold it with both hands together. Oliva, who got up, quipped, "Why did you change your grip with 2 hands?" said Oliva. "Really not cool." Oliva also intended to change his grip style to pinky and thumb, which surprised everyone. Everyone saw that, confused by the situation, Guevara started pulling out some of his beard and turned it into an attack. Oliva was hit by Guevara's attack, but although there were no serious injuries, Oliva had subconsciously changed his own grip. Maria, who saw their fight, found it very boring to her and started to distract Oliva. Now Guevara returned to using Oliva's grip style and then continued to hit him, aiming for Oliva's face. Oliva, who was feeling uneasy in his heart, had bored his idol. Suddenly, Oliva asked Guevara to stop hitting him and see how his fingers didn't grip anymore, but just let the bandana in his hands, implying it was a lose-lose. The style of a man named Gilberto, where Gilberto is a hotelier. The first to build a luxury hotel in France in 1940. Even so, he was greatly admired by foreigners and despised by local residents because of his success. But on the other hand, he is a mafia. In the late 60s, he withheld bribes from his boss, making his organization decide to kill him to coincide with the midnight full moon. Gilberto was surrounded by fully armed troops, but during his execution, 2 people with other potential victims had to hold handkerchiefs and attack. The one that escapes will be shot immediately, unlike old Gilberto leaving the handkerchief in his hand without gripping it, and we already know who will be the winner. In order to draw, Guevara will do the same style that was done by Oliva. They seem to be desperately holding on to their handkerchiefs. Such a fighting style made Baki very bored. Suddenly, Oliva was shocked when she saw Baki sleeping on her lover's bed. Oliva spontaneously forgot about the handkerchief and asked what Baki was doing there. But Maria scolded Oliva back and then said what you two were doing was fighting because of a handkerchief was very strange to her. The more dangerous, the more manly, according to Maria. Guevara made Oliva understand that men should solve problems simply. It appears that Guevara took a bit of his hair, turning it into a device that destroys the eardrum. Oliva, who had returned to fighting mode, swiftly held Guevara's hand and gave him a fist. Now we can be sure that it is Oliva who is still in power in this prison, and the theme of love for Baki has awakened the ridiculous fight earlier, accompanied by the cheers of the convicts who returned to support Oliva. although originally they hoped Oliva would lose to Guevara. Shortly thereafter, Guevara heard pirate chants implying that he had not yet lost while rising, then grabbed the ground to paint his own face and quickly gave up Oliva. Dropped Oliva seemed to let go of his attack, but implied to the prisoners that Oliva had been crushed and backed up to Guevara. But Oliva still can stand right in front of him along with the wind blowing again. Guevara tried to attack a second time. Guevara was still trying to get up, remembering how his people had suffered so much and how his struggle with his men to achieve independence had given him the spirit to stand up again. Guevara still challenges getting Oliva to improve his serious body by condensing all his muscles. Martial arts have always prioritized and believed in a muscle they train. But over time, muscles were not the most important element in fighting and martial arts. As if insinuating Oliva's muscles, it turns out that speed is what is needed and the right weak point. Even in Qi, breathing becomes the most important element in changing attack and defense techniques. Since then, it began to give birth to modern martial arts, but when it comes back to the past and to the era of the stone axe where humans were fighting each other, there was no progress in the martial arts. They only relied on the earth as a support, but amazingly that logic was still valid until now. It was felt that he had won. Not long after, Baki came to inform him that someone wanted to meet him, and it turned out that President George Bush was kneeling in fear. It turned out that he had come with Yujiro Hanma, who had asked him to take him to this place to meet Guevara. Guevara couldn't believe he saw the American president sitting with him, and was also shocked to be directly confronted by Yujiro Hanma, the strongest being on Earth, and asked why Guevara was like that. "Even though I'm called the strongest being in the world or something like that, I think you're the one," said Yujiro, mocking Guevara. Suddenly, without a sound, everyone had to be stunned when Oliva, who was still getting up, attacked the off-guard Guevara. Baki then complimented Oliva, who really trusted his muscles when fighting. Baki seemed to have wasted Guevara's words. Now Oliva looked down and challenged him to fight with her. The tray bounced off smoothly from Oliva's attack. "He must hear apologies, de Oliva." Baki thought that was just nonsense, but the fact is that Oliva builds his muscles not for fighting, he dedicates them to the girl he loves. Long story short, the next day, where it was discovered that Guevara had disappeared from his room. Guevara left a letter which was shown for Oliva and Maria. After opening the contents of the envelope, it turned out to be a money originating from the country led by Guevara. Shortly thereafter, police discovered a dug hole Guevara allegedly used to escape. Warden was surprised when Guevara prepared this hole. According to Oliva, Guevara could have just walked out through the gate at will, even though the warden who knew about it would have pretended not to see him. But here Guevara just didn't want to embarrass the jailers. That's why Guevara prepared a hole for him to escape. But now the money was given by Guevara, implying to them that it was an invitation for Oliva to come to his country. Meanwhile, on the island itself, the loggers were surprised by the presence of their leader, who suddenly joined their activities. Long story short, Guevara explained that his departure this month was to America to meet Oliva, to try to fight him who is said to be the strongest man in America. But when one asked whether he had won, Guevara said no, spontaneously diverting the conversation to lose one of its residents now has twins. Back at the prison, all prisoners are still carrying out their usual activities, where they have to line up in front of the hostel every morning in order to be absent. But all at once, Baki's permission to step outside for a breath of air lasted for up to 4 minutes. The warden wanted to hear what Baki had to say again, and because he was already causing trouble. Baki prepares to leave for a moment while being supported by other prisoners, but before that he has to go through several guards. Arriving outside the gate, Baki was awaited by the head of the Arizona Penitentiary with fully armed troops who did not let Baki breathe the outside air, and it was time to return to his room. Before that, the warden who asked Baki motivated him to do something reckless like this. However, Baki reveals that he only wants to be a prisoner who is not bound by punishment and rules, he said. Immediately, the guards surrounded him with their guns pointed at him, and the warden asked if it was possible for Baki to escape under these circumstances. While adjusting his glasses, Baki calmly explained that he had done something. Suddenly, the warden's glasses mysteriously broke. The fact turned out to be Baki's own doing. When the warden's head slightly lowered his face with extraordinary speed, Baki was able to throw his hand to break the head warden's glasses. Not only that, Baki had unbuttoned the clothes of the wardens around him. If the gun aimed at him hits his head, then Baki will first crush their testicles or throat with the speed of his hand. But the chief warden, who doesn't believe it, asks all of his members to be sure to shoot Baki right away. But those who were already frightened couldn't shoot Baki for fear of dying first. It wasn't long before the warden, who was slowly getting scared, was now taken hostage by Baki to escort him to the main gate. Now Baki's wish has come true to breathe the outside air like a prisoner who is not bound by rules and now asks to be handcuffed to be escorted back to his cell. Then Oliva came while driving a motorbike and asked Baki to return to his detention room. But Baki replied that he was just going out for a while and asked back if my freedom bothered you. Baki said, "Didn't I just go out as I please without using a weapon and come back any time? Aren't we no different? We will be equal." It was Oliva refusing to be compared with him. Well, it doesn't matter. Who's the freest in this prison? The goal is just to show his father that his father is not a free man in this world while leaving Oliva. Oliva was silent, as if worried about his reputation being humiliated by Baki, and started to get angry while parking his motorcycle. In the evening, Oliva will again meet Maria in her room with neat clothes and flowers. He was getting ready to go into his room, but somehow now it felt like meeting him for the first time. Long story short, Baki is back in a cell with a cramped room. With his thumbs handcuffed from behind, Oliva suddenly came, who noticed Baki's concerned state. Plus, from yesterday, Baki always mocked his freedom, but the reality is Baki has to be held in a tight place like this. While he still lives in a state of luxury, he can even feel 100,000 calories per day, as if proving who is the freest in this prison. While peeing in Baki's face and warning Baki this Arizona prison fruit is his empire. Baki would calmly ensure that in the near future, Oliva would be begging him to have a match with him. While laughing at Oliva, why is the strongest man in America pissing on a helpless man whose hands are in handcuffs? Long story short, Oliva met the head of the Arizona prison. Oliva intends the warden to arrange his match with Baki, and if necessary, live broadcast of his match with Baki across America, and without the Arizona warden who loves brutality even agreeing to it. Moving on, when Oliva returned to see Mariah, he reflected on how Mariah's past used to be a beautiful girl who always stole the attention of men. But when Maria fell ill, she had to take a lot of drugs, which resulted in obesity like this. But even so, for Oliva, she was still the same Maria she used to be. Then Oliva returned to see Baki and gave news that about 2 weeks until their fight would take place. The match will also be broadcast live across America. But Baki says 2 weeks is too long to wait. According to Baki, this is his and Oliva's fight. Why everyone should see implying on Oliva Baki is challenging him to fight this second. Oliva, who started to get serious, added to that would be difficult to fight. With this position, Baki began to shift his joints slightly in order to rotate his arms forward, while the small handcuffs on his thumbs were slowly released. Now they are both free. Baki attacked Oliva first, but Oliva caught Baki's arm and pulled him into his room. Oliva asked the prisoner named Cook to get out of the way, and Oliva, who quickly spun Baki into the air and knocked him away. Oliva, who was also blown away while pushing, managed to penetrate several walls of the detention cell. Now Baki, who is lying weakly, is still being hit repeatedly. The extraordinary and unbalanced strength had thrown him a little nostalgic about the past with his father, because Baki really remembers that incident, where he immediately felt as if he was melting even more gently, like melting and expanding to fill the room. Baki raised his spirits back. The warden who saw the incident was shocked, plus the concrete floor used to lie on it gave a mark in the shape of an evil's face. Oliva had been waiting for a counterattack from Baki. Baki's attack was actually faster than Oliva's. a move that was exactly the same as a samurai who faced each other while patiently waiting for his opponent's weak points. Luckily, there is CCTV that can explain how the incident could happen. It is clear how Baki attacked in less than a second. Oliva, who had been thrown, came to his senses and began to understand how Baki's review worked. Oliva admits that Baki's ability is growing rapidly. Oliva once heard from a scientist named Tonarin that human consciousness is actually delayed by 0.5 seconds. When humans start planning to move, a signal time is needed when it is sent to the brain. For example, like a knife attack that is aimed at us, it takes a 0.5-second delay to allow us to give a danger signal to the brain. Spontaneous brain orders us to step aside. But what amazed Oliva was that Baki managed to use such a short gap to turn it into a very deadly attack. Oliva suddenly positioned his body to form an almost perfect ball. This time it really took Baki by surprise. This is because Baki barely saw Oliva's position change. Baki, as the son of this devil, is very interested in him, but Baki must be surprised when his attacks mean nothing to Oliva. Oliva, who is known to be able to move his biceps sequentially, is more precisely able to move the part of the muscle he wants freely. Obviously, that allowed Baki's attack to be blocked by Oliva's muscles. The padded arm muscles allowed Oliva to survive Baki's attack without moving a muscle. Baki also began to realize that Oliva had extraordinary muscle mass. This allowed him to perform extraordinary defenses, and now Baki tries his hand at Gotaijutsu attacks. Still unmoved, he suddenly caught Baki's hand. Then by swallowing his body alive, not in the mouth, but forcing it into one of the muscles of his body, slowly making anyone who saw him definitely not believe it. Baki was removed from Oliva's clump of muscle in a helpless, limp state. The warden saw Baki, who was limp and helpless, reminded him of his childhood. Like where he once caught a dragonfly whose vitality was very strong, or his vitality ability was very high because the dragonfly looked healthy, squirming to escape. But because he didn't have a container, he held it slowly without trying to hurt him. But when he got home, he was surprised to see the dragonfly was helpless. It can be concluded that this action can stress the dragonfly and have an impact on its vitality or decrease the dragonfly's ability to live. This case is similar to what Baki is experiencing now. Oliva approached Baki, who was assuming that if this had been a tournament match, then he would have won in one round. But unfortunately, this place is not a boxing ring, and there is no referee to declare victory. Baki is still able to speak out a solution as there is no referee in their fight. Then there is no other way that one of them must fight until he admits defeat. If necessary, there must be a death among them. An enraged Oliva begins to brutally attack Baki again. The tray, which had started to recover a little, immediately got back up. Oliva asks him to fight manly this time, but there is a scream from Iron Michael upstairs asking Baki to stop fighting Oliva. Iron Michael said that it was impossible for Baki to beat him. That would be tantamount to suicide. Baki understood that Iron Michael was worried about him, but hearing Michael's fears, Baki felt it was worth a try, and it was sure to be a death match. Trey punched as hard as he could hit Oliva, making the prison wall break down to the prison yard. Now it appears that Oliva is lying weak, not long after Oliva gets back up, because he sees Maria, who is already in front of him. As if worried about Oliva and wondering if you were outdone by that brat. While looking down, Oliva acknowledged it, but spontaneously Maria's face looked a little relieved and not angry. Maria then invited Oliva to carry her back to her room. The next day, Oliva gathers all the prisoners under his control to confirm the rumors that he was defeated by Baki. This makes almost no believe. Because of this, Oliva admits that he is not currently the strongest in the Arizona prison. Obviously, this situation worries his standing. Then Oliva plans to expel Baki from this prison unconditionally. Long story short, Baki was ordered to go and sent home from prison. Baki only asked for a bicycle, supplies, and some money for his journey. However, Baki is now considered a dangerous man and must be escorted by a helicopter to the airport. The scene switches to Captain Stridham and Yujiro Hanma, who are in a prehistoric museum. Here, the captain gives news that Baki has grown much faster than Yujiro himself imagined. Baki has managed to defeat Oliva. But according to Stridham, Baki's training is indeed very unique in that he uses the medium of his own imagination to get opponents that satisfy his fighting appetite. Stridham then asks again if Baki has become a threat to Yujiro. Yujiro, who was getting annoyed, then asked him to be quiet. But when he saw the giant bear, the captain assumed that Yujiro would easily defeat him. But is Baki able to beat him too? If he is able, he should also be able to beat Yujiro. Yujiro looks very angry. Then the captain realizes that he talks too much and compares it. The captain later apologizes and reveals that he is just worried about Yujiro and Baki's match. This will be a very extraordinary fight in the world because for the first time, Yujiro has a very tough opponent.